My parents are sectarians, and they abused me in childhood. They changed my name, and my brother pretended to be someone else. My name's Travis, I'm 32, and on paper, my life probably looks like it was wrapped in gold foil. I'm a psychotherapist in New Haven. Good at what I do, too. Steady income, solid reputation, even got my own office downtown. Last summer, my wife Julia and I moved into a big house just outside the city. A charming, blue-sided colonial with a wraparound porch and a wide backyard May could finally stretch her legs in. May is my 12-year-old daughter from my previous marriage. She's sharp, quiet, a little quirky. She's into obscure music for someone her age, like she's the type to have a playlist titled 1974 Sadcore on her phone. She's not the easiest kid to get close to, but once you do, she's deeply loyal. She's also been through a lot, which makes what's happening now even harder. Julia. Well, let's just say things didn't turn out the way I thought they would. She's 30, works in publishing, and when we first met, she came off as confident, passionate, even a little intimidating in a way I admired. She had this "I know who I am" vibe that I found grounding. But with May, from day one, it was like trying to mix oil and water. Not explosive, just off. She'd force smiles, speak in that fake upbeat tone people use when they're trying too hard, and then later vent to me when May went to bed. Why does she always look at me like that? She's just so weird sometimes. Things like that. At first, I chalked it up to growing pains. I mean, blending a family is hard, right? Julia had no kids of her own and went from a quiet apartment to living with a tween who listens to Radiohead and has night terrors. But as the months went on, it became more than just awkward tension. Julia started making rules that only applied to May, like she couldn't use the downstairs bathroom because guests come through there, or she needed to keep her room neater than everyone else's. She even suggested we get a lock for our bedroom door, not because of anything May had done, but because she's getting older and girls are curious. I shut that down immediately, but the suggestion alone haunted me. And then, about 6 weeks ago, the letters started coming. They weren't mailed, not officially. No stamp, just plain white envelopes, typed out addresses, slipped through the slot in our front door, or left in the mailbox like a flyer. At first I thought it was some local church group or charity. But the moment I opened the first one, I knew this wasn't random. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper. No return address. No signature. Just a typed paragraph in courier font. You used to eat powdered milk and sugar from the can when your mom wasn't looking. Do you remember the sticky heat of that basement? The yellow bowl with the chip in the side? I read it 3 times before I even sat down. It was true. Every word. When I was a kid, back when things were darker, my mom used to leave my brother and me down in the basement with cereal and powdered milk. I used to sneak spoonfuls of it straight from the tin, and I remember that bowl. The chip was shaped like a crescent moon. I hadn't thought about that in decades. I've talked about my childhood in therapy, processed a lot of it, but that detail, the powdered milk, that exact bowl, I had buried it. I didn't tell Julia about it, just stuck it in a drawer and tried to forget it. Until the second one came. This time it was left under my windshield wiper while I was parked at the clinic. You once cried in the crawl space behind the furnace when you thought your dad had died. You didn't come out until your brother pulled you out by the ankles. Why was the flashlight under your pillow? I sat in my car for over an hour after that, just trying to breathe. That story wasn't even in my journals. Not even my therapist knows that. I never told anyone. I had been maybe 6 or 7, and my dad went on a bender. Disappeared for 2 days. My mom told me he was gone. I thought he was dead and crawled into that narrow crawl space with a flashlight and didn't come out until my brother Ethan found me. I kept that flashlight under my pillow for months after. That was when I realized this wasn't just someone playing games. This was someone who knew me. Not just my name or where I lived, but me. The deep, hidden corners of my memory. I started to feel like someone was crawling around inside my mind, rearranging the furniture. And things at home were getting worse. Julia began making offhand comments about May's behavioral issues. Told one of our neighbors that she suspected May might have some mild disorder, maybe on the spectrum. She brought up the idea of family therapy, which would be fine if it weren't so obviously a way to pathologize my kid. When I tried to call her out on it, she twisted it around. Told me I was being defensive because I didn't want to admit May was struggling. May, for the record, wasn't struggling. At least not until recently. But now she was quieter than ever. She'd started sleeping with her door locked and her light on. When I asked her about it, she said Julia had gone into her room one night while she was asleep and moved her notebooks. She was reading them, Dad. She read them and then put them back in the wrong order. I wanted to believe it was paranoia, but after the letters, I couldn't rule anything out. Then the third letter came. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, in blue ink, and it had only one sentence. I remember the cellar door, Travis. Do you? And that was when I knew this wasn't just about memory. Someone was trying to unbury something. Something I had spent my entire adult life building walls around. Because yes, I remembered the cellar door, but I wish I didn't. The first time the phrase, whispering walls, appeared in one of the letters, something shifted in me. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing back to the bedroom I'd grown up in. The small upstairs room in our old colonial in Ridgefield, with the slanted ceiling and that stupid paisley wallpaper I used to peel off in strips during storms. Whispering walls wasn't just some poetic line. It was something I'd actually said, once, maybe 5 or 6 years old, when I told my mom I couldn't sleep because the walls were talking again. I remember the look she gave me, a mix of tiredness and something colder, like fear she was trying to swallow. I hadn't been back to that house in years, not since they renovated the kitchen and turned my old room into a guest suite. But now, I couldn't get it out of my head. I told Julia I had a client emergency and drove up to Connecticut the next morning without telling anyone. The drive was a little under 2 hours, but it felt longer. The closer I got, the tighter my chest felt. Ridgefield hadn't changed much. Still the same quiet streets and clean sidewalks, the same boutique shops, and that bakery that somehow still sold the same dry cinnamon rolls. But my parents' house looked different. The lawn was overgrown, and one of the shutters on the second floor was hanging at a crooked angle. That would have been unthinkable back when my mother used to prune the hydrangeas with nail scissors. When I rang the doorbell, I expected the usual awkward hug from my mother, maybe a clipped Travis from my dad. Instead, the door swung open, and there he was, Alex. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. Last I heard, he was in some facility in Maine, something expensive and full of crystals. He looked thinner now. Not sick, but different. His hair was longer, tied back, and he had this stare. Not cold, not angry. Just steady, like he was sizing me up and not quite sure if I was real. "Hey," he said, and for a second, it felt like we were teenagers again, standing on the porch waiting for Dad to unlock the door after school. "Hey," I managed. "Didn't know you were back. Got out 2 weeks ago," he said, stepping aside. "Didn't expect to see you either." The inside of the house was dim, and it smelled faintly of dust and orange peels. The furniture hadn't changed. The same heavy floral drapes, the same cracked leather sofa that wheezed when you sat on it. But something was off. I felt it as soon as I stepped inside. Like the air itself was heavier. Mom was in the kitchen, standing by the sink like she'd been frozen there. She turned when she heard my voice and gave a tired smile. "Travis, you should have called." Her eyes looked sunken, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She hugged me, but it was loose, distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You look worn out." She brushed it off. "Your father's been working nights. Alex being home is a lot to adjust to." Right. That explained the look, but not the rest of it. The way her hands trembled when she reached for the kettle. The way she flinched slightly when Alex walked into the room. It was subtle, but I caught it. "Dad wasn't home," she said. "Out on a supply run. He's been fixing the garage door," she added quickly, like she was trying to fill the silence. "You know how he gets with projects." Sure. I knew. I went upstairs under the pretense of needing the bathroom, but I really just wanted to see it. My old room. The guest suite now. When I opened the door, I almost laughed. It was nothing like I remembered. The walls were a soft gray now. The bed a sterile hotel-like queen with matching throw pillows. The only thing they hadn't changed was the creaking floorboard near the window. I stepped on it instinctively. Still the same. I stood there for a while, just staring at the wall where my old bed used to be. That was where the whispers came from. At least, that's how it felt back then. There were nights when I would lie in bed, staring at that wall, convinced I could hear something on the other side. Not mice. Not pipes. Words. Faint, soft, unintelligible murmurs that would stop the moment I turned on the light. I never told anyone except Alex. And he never believed me. Until one night, he slept in my room because he'd broken the window in his with a baseball. We were maybe 11 and 13. I woke up in the middle of the night, and he was already awake, staring at the wall. "I hear it too," he whispered. The next morning, he told me I'd imagined it. Said he was just messing with me. But I never forgot his face in the dark. He wasn't lying. Now, years later, I turned to leave the room and found Alex standing in the hallway, arms crossed. "You came because of the letters," he said, not asking. I nodded. "You know something?" He stared past me for a long moment, then stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. "They're not random. Whoever's sending them. This isn't just about scaring you. They're digging." "Digging what?" He looked at the wall. "You remember that summer? After the fire?" I froze. "We weren't supposed to talk about that." "Exactly," he said. "And yet here we are." He walked to the window, touched the frame like he was checking for heat. "Dad's been acting weird. Keeps locking the basement. Started sleeping in his office. And Mom, She keeps waking up crying. She thinks I don't hear her, but I do. I didn't know what to say. Alex turned back to me. You want to know who's sending the letters? I think you already do. You just don't want to admit it. Something in my gut twisted. Because the way he said it, the certainty in his voice, made it clear he wasn't talking about a stranger. He was talking about someone who had been there all along. Someone we both knew. Someone still in this house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the old pull-out couch in what used to be the den, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, the familiar hum blending with the creaks of the old house. Every few minutes I'd hear footsteps, maybe my dad pacing upstairs, maybe just the house settling. But either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I made my way quietly through the hallway, past the front room where Alex had left the TV on mute, the screen flickering with a blue glow. I pushed open the door to the basement, and even though I knew every inch of that house, my hand hesitated on the switch. It wasn't just the dark down there that unsettled me. It was memory. That basement used to be a place of comfort when I was small. My brother and I would play games there, build forts, spin in the old office chair until we crashed into walls. But something shifted when I was around 7. Suddenly, we weren't allowed to go down there alone. The door had a new lock. My parents would disappear for hours at a time and come back quieter, their faces pale and unreadable. As I stood at the top of the stairs, something Alex had said earlier echoed in my mind. You already know who's sending the letters. I didn't. Not exactly, but I was starting to connect the pieces. And those pieces weren't adding up to anything sane. I went down the stairs without turning on the light. I didn't need to. My feet remembered where each step creaked. I passed the old freezer, still humming faintly, and ducked under the low pipe that nearly took out my forehead every year until I learned to remember it. Then I stopped in front of the wall. The far wall had once been covered with corkboard and calendars, layers of paper that always seemed to have something scheduled. But when I was a kid, it also had another purpose. That's where they held the sessions. Or at least that's what they called them. The words came back to me like dust shaken off a shelf. Release, witness, cleanse. My family didn't go to church. We weren't religious. My parents always said faith was too rigid, too small-minded. They preferred something they called the path, which I'd never questioned much as a child. It was just part of our lives. They'd meet with a group of friends every month, sometimes at our place, sometimes at someone else's, always late at night, always after the kids were supposed to be asleep. But I wasn't asleep. I'd sneak down to the stairs and lie on my stomach, peeking through the narrow railings, watching. There were candles. That part one remember clearly. Long, narrow ones that made the room smell like wax and burnt sugar. People sat in a circle. Sometimes they whispered things to each other, confessions or memories. I was too far to hear everything. And sometimes, they'd take turns standing in the middle and screaming. That's not an exaggeration. I mean real, full-body screaming. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they hit themselves. Sometimes someone else would step in and do it for them. They called it cleansing through trauma. The belief was that suffering peeled away the layers of the false self, revealing something raw, something closer to the soul. I was too young to understand it then. I just knew it scared me. When I finally asked my mom about it, maybe I was 10, she didn't deny it. She sat me down, her face calm, and said that sometimes people need to suffer to grow. Pain is not the enemy, she told me. It's the doorway. If you love someone, you don't protect them from pain. You walk them through it. I didn't understand that either. But I remembered it. And I remembered what happened to Alex. He was 14. One day he was just gone. I asked where he went, and my dad told me he was staying with the elders for a while. That's what they called the core group. The founding members, people with names I barely knew but whose faces were burned into my childhood. There was a couple named Terrence and Elise who always wore black. There was another man, Dalton, who had a tattoo of a circle on the back of his neck and never smiled. Alex was gone for over 3 months. No calls, no letters. No one talked about it. And then one day he came back. I remember the day vividly. He walked through the door like nothing had happened. Taller, thinner, and with a weird stillness about him. Like something inside him had been shaved down. He hugged our parents, shook my hand. Didn't even look surprised to see me. From then on, he was different. He stopped fighting with our dad. He stopped complaining about anything, really. Just smiled in this tight, practiced way and did what he was told. Back then, I thought he'd just matured or something. Maybe he'd learned discipline. But now, as I stood in that basement and stared at the blank wall where all of that had happened, I felt sick. Like I'd swallowed something rotten years ago and it had just now started to move. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and tried to make sense of it. All the times I thought my parents were just eccentric, just driven, just philosophical. That wasn't it. They believed in something twisted, and they practiced it on their own children. On Alex. Maybe even on me. And if these letters were meant to remind me, to unblock my memory, maybe they weren't from someone on the outside at all. Maybe they were from someone who still believed. Maybe they were from someone who thought I'd forgotten the pain and wanted to bring it back. Back in New Haven, Julia had started to act strange. More guarded, more calculating. I noticed it the moment I came home after that visit to my parents' house. She didn't greet me with a kiss or even a hello, just a glance over her shoulder from the kitchen and a tight, "How was the drive?" I tried to pretend nothing was different, but she was already miles ahead of me. She had started digging. A few days later, I came into my office and found the bottom drawer of my desk slightly open. That drawer is always locked. I keep my handwritten notes in there, the kind of private, unsanitized thoughts you don't put in official client files. Things I jot down during or after sessions when something strikes me as important, but not yet fully formed. I froze. Nothing was missing, not exactly, but the top notepad had been flipped to a page I hadn't touched in weeks. The paper was slightly smudged, like it had been handled. Julia said nothing at first, but I could feel the air between us getting thinner. She wasn't accusing me, not outright, but she was watching, waiting. Then one night, I walked into the living room and saw my leather-bound session book open on the coffee table, right next to her glass of wine. She didn't even pretend she hadn't read it. "Who's Michael R?" she asked, not looking up. "Says here he's a 48-year-old veteran with PTSD. You said you were working with college students this semester." I reached for the book, but she pulled it back. "And Dana K?" "The woman with 3 miscarriages and a severe anxiety disorder." "When did she come in?" "I checked your calendar. There's no Dana K." It was too late to lie. She'd already gone further than I thought she would. "I write composite notes," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. "Sometimes I blend details, especially if I'm trying to work through something clinical. It helps me process." Julia stared at me with that blank face she used when she was about to drop something heavy. "I hired someone," she said. "A pie." I actually laughed for a second, like I'd misheard her. "I had to," she went on. "You've been acting strange for months, Travis. The letters, the middle of the night drives, the things you say in your sleep. You talk like someone's chasing you." I didn't know what else to do. I stood there silent while she reached for a file folder sitting on the couch. It was thick. She slid it across the table toward me, but didn't let go. "You're not going to believe what I found," she said. "But I didn't go looking for this. I just followed the thread." Inside were photos, photocopies of hospital records, birth certificates, all dated within weeks of my birth. One in particular made my blood run cold. It was a death certificate. Travis L. Halpern. Male. Born 1992. Deceased 1992. The date matched my birthday. The name matched mine. But that didn't make sense. I was alive. I was me. Julia flipped the paper and showed me the accompanying file from the birth hospital. Twins. Born premature. One survived. One died. Except I had never been told I had a twin. "Your brother," Julia said, tapping the name on the form. "Alex isn't listed here. This is Levi." That was the name. Levi. Travis died. Levi survived. My mind was unraveling as I read it. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt thick, like I was trying to form words underwater. "Except Levi doesn't exist now," she said quietly. "You do." I sat down, shaking. "I talked to someone who worked at the hospital back then," she said. She barely remembered the case, but she confirmed what the documents say. There were twins. "Your parents told everyone one had died." "And I'm Travis," I said automatically. "I've always been Travis." Julia nodded slowly. "But your birth certificate doesn't say Travis. It says Levi Alexander Halpern." And then, months later, a name change petition was filed. Not by your parents. By a guardian listed only as G. Halpern. Gerard. My father. He had filed to change the surviving twins' name from Levi to Travis. As if trying to erase something. Or rewrite it. The floor felt like it was tilting under me. Julia sat on the edge of the coffee table and said, more softly this time, "If Travis died, then who are you? And who is Alex?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I was still trying to breathe through what Julia had shown me when I heard the knock on the guest room door. It was almost midnight, the house quiet except for the soft rattle of the radiator in the hallway. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there at the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope in my lap with my birth name printed in fading ink. Levi, not Travis. The knock came again, softer this time. Then the door creaked open and Alex stepped in without asking. He didn't look angry, just calm. Too calm. He walked in with bare feet and sat down on the floor against the far wall like he was settling in for something long overdue. The dim light from the hallway caught the edge of his face. Tired eyes, shadows under the skin, a kind of slow, studied weight in the way he moved. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then he looked up at me and said, "Do you remember the basement door that didn't lock right? The one that always popped open if you slammed it too hard?" I nodded. I used to sneak out through it, he said, when I couldn't take it anymore. He said it like it was nothing, like we were talking about skipping school or stealing cigarettes. I kept quiet, waiting. I knew something was coming. They kept him down there, you know, he said. I still not meeting mine. The one they said died. My heart started to beat too fast. What are you talking about? I asked, but my voice barely came out. Alex looked at me for the first time, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to find something buried deep behind them. They called him Travis. That was his name. You were Levi. You were the one they wanted to forget. I felt like my skin was crawling off my body. That doesn't make sense. I'm Travis. I've always been Travis. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. They switched you after the fire. When he got hurt, burned. He wasn't the same after that. They couldn't look at him without seeing their failure. But you. He pointed at me, like he was tracing an outline only he could see. You were still whole. Quiet. Easier. They changed your name. Gave you his clothes. His books. They took the broken one and locked him away. Stop, I said, standing up so quickly I nearly tripped over the edge of the bed. You're messing with me. This is some twisted joke. Alex didn't move. Is it? Or have you just started to remember? I couldn't take it. I walked out of the room and down the hallway, gripping the banister like I might fall without it. But he followed. Not fast. Just steady, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken off. You always thought the whispers were coming from the walls, he said behind me. But they weren't. They were coming from the room beneath yours. I stopped cold. You heard him, didn't you? Alex said, his voice quieter now, almost tender. You used to wake up crying. You'd say, he's still down there. And they'd tell you it was a dream. No, I said. I don't know. They gave you his name, his room, his life. And when you started to ask questions, they sent you the letters. They wanted to remind you who you were. Or maybe, who you weren't. My hands were shaking. My body felt distant, like I was watching myself from across the room. Alex stepped beside me, his eyes fixed on the dark stairwell leading down to the basement. You were never supposed to remember, he said. But you always did, didn't you? In flashes. In dreams. In the mirror. He leaned in then, so close I could smell the old shampoo in his hair, and whispered, maybe you're not Travis. Maybe you're just the part of him they could live with. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I pushed past him. I think I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the tile floor until the sun started to come up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong, like a stranger was wearing my skin. I don't know if he was telling the truth. But the worst part is, I'm starting to think I do. The house was silent when I came downstairs that morning. No clinking of dishes, no low hum of the kettle, no May humming to herself at the table like she usually did when she thought no one was listening. I checked the clock, 7:42. She should have been halfway through her cereal by then, shoes on, backpack by the door, already asking Julia if they were out of almond milk again. But her chair was empty. The cereal box was untouched on the counter. Her bedroom door was open, the bed still made, her phone on the nightstand. I called her name once, then again louder, walking from room to room. Nothing. No response. I stepped outside, checked the driveway, the street, the side of the house where she sometimes sat on the porch when she needed air. Nothing. That's when I felt the cold. Not from the air. From something deeper, heavier. I ran back in and found Julia at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, still in her robe. She didn't turn around when I said her name. She's not here. I told her. Did she say anything to you? Her voice was low and flat. No. She didn't come down. We need to check. I started, but she turned then, her face pale and tight with something I couldn't quite name. I heard you, she said. I blinked. What? Last night. On the phone. You were in your office with the door half open. You said something about a victim. You said the word twice. I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone dry. I wasn't, Julia, that wasn't about May. Then who? She snapped. Who were you talking about at midnight while your daughter slept down the hall? I didn't have an answer that would satisfy her. Hell, I didn't have an answer that satisfied me. I didn't remember making that call. I didn't remember picking up the phone at all. Julia's voice cracked. You've been unraveling for weeks. Letters, secrets, lies, God, Travis, I don't even know who you are anymore. I didn't wait for her to finish. I ran back upstairs, searched every corner of May's room, then the attic, the basement, the backyard. I called her phone over and over until it went to voicemail. At 8:15, we called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers, polite but stiff. They walked the perimeter, took notes, asked questions I couldn't answer. Had she seemed withdrawn lately? Had she said anything about running away? Had we gotten into any arguments? Julia handled most of it. I stood off to the side, head spinning, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the rest. I felt useless, like I was watching someone else live through my nightmare. When they asked if she might have gone to her mother's, my ex's, I called her immediately. No, she hadn't seen May. No, she hadn't even spoken to her in days. She sounded panicked. I could hear the dread climbing into her throat. The police took May's phone. They looked through her messages, her browser history, her location history. Nothing. No signs of distress. No planned meetups. No suspicious messages. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Then, as one of the officers walked back to the car to radio something in, I saw it. Slipped into the mailbox. No stamp. No address. Just like the others. I took it without thinking and opened it right there on the porch, hands trembling. One line. Just one. May is your chance to redeem yourself. The words blurred and swam in front of my eyes. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the edge of the railing to stay upright. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the whole neighborhood apart. But all I could do was stare at those words, over and over, feeling them carve themselves into my skull. May was gone. And somehow, this was all circling back to me. And to them. My parents. That house. The cellar I wasn't supposed to remember. I called the officer over, tried to show him the letter, but as soon as I pulled it out again, it was gone. Just a blank sheet of paper. The writing had vanished. Or maybe it had never been there at all. I didn't tell Julia I was going. I waited until the house was quiet and she was asleep, or pretending to be. I packed a small bag and drove north through the night, headlights cutting through mist, barely stopping except to refuel. I didn't even feel the cold until I stepped out of the car in my parents' driveway, and the morning wind hit me in the face like a warning. The house looked empty, curtains drawn, no car in the driveway. But I knew better than to trust appearances in this place. I had grown up here, and every inch of it carried a weight I could feel in my bones before I even opened the door. Inside, the silence was thick. I walked past the same framed photos on the wall, school portraits, a few black and white wedding shots of people I never met, and one I used to think was me, a toddler standing beside a tree, smiling too wide, eyes slightly off. I used to think it was me, but now I wasn't sure of anything. I went straight for the basement door. It looked the same as always, plain white paint, brass knob, a faint dent near the bottom where my brother once kicked it during a tantrum. Except now, it had a new addition. A sliding bolt on the outside, rusted at the edges. They'd locked it years ago, after the renovations, told me it was full of old storage and rat traps. I slid the bolt open and pushed, but the door wouldn't budge. Locked from the inside. I stood there for a full minute before I realized I was holding my breath. Then I did what I had come to do. I forced it. One shoulder, full weight, splintering wood. It cracked loud enough to echo through the house. I stepped inside. The basement smelled like damp wood and rust. The light switch didn't work, so I used the flashlight on my phone, sweeping it across old paint cans, a broken water heater, shelves of dusty tools. But behind a sagging shelving unit in the far corner, there was something else. A panel of the wall that didn't match. It looked newer, less worn than the surrounding concrete. I pulled at it, and it gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow doorway. The air changed the moment I stepped through. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. Still, heavy, the way a room gets when it hasn't been opened in years. My flashlight flickered for a second and then steadied, and what I saw made my stomach twist. The walls were covered in fabric, dark red, heavy drapes that looked like they were meant to muffle sound. The floor was concrete, but in the center was a thick black rug, stained and frayed at the edges. Around the room were objects, arranged deliberately, like a stage set. Candles, now melted into warped stubs. A mirror on one wall, covered in soot. A chair bolted to the floor. And in the far corner, a small cabinet. I moved toward it slowly, every step like walking through molasses. I opened it, and found what I hadn't expected, tapes. Dozens of them. VHS, labeled in my father's handwriting. Witness I. Session 3. Levi correction. I didn't touch those. I went for the unmarked one, shoved in the back like they'd tried to forget it existed. I found the old TV setup nearby, dusty but functional. I slid the tape in. At first, there was only static. Then the screen flickered to life. I saw myself, or who I used to be. 7, maybe 8 years old. In that same room. The chair was there, the mirror behind it. My father's voice, calm but firm, saying, "Begin." And then I saw the other child, bound to the chair, crying. I didn't recognize the face, not at first. Swollen, bruised, head shaved. I watched as my younger self stepped forward, hesitating, holding something in my hand. I couldn't tell what it was. A stick? A cord? I didn't want to watch. But I couldn't stop. The child in the chair lifted his face and looked directly into the camera. "Alex." I staggered back, ball rising in my throat. I wanted to turn it off, to destroy the tape, the television, the whole goddamn room. But I kept watching. My child self moved mechanically, like I was following instructions. My father's voice again, saying, This is how we break the false self. This is how we make you clean. I don't remember doing any of it. I don't remember being there. But the tape was real. And so was the sound of Alex screaming. The screen cut to black. I stood there in the flickering silence, the hum of the VCR filling the room like static in my head. They had made me hurt him. Not just hurt him. They had made me believe it was love. Cleansing. Purification. I fell to the floor, knees cracking against the concrete, hands clutching my face like I could claw the images out. They had turned us against each other. And I still didn't know what they had done to May. The box at the back of the cabinet was heavier than it looked. Tucked behind the tapes and old reels, wrapped in a mildewed sheet, it had the kind of weight that made your hands go numb. Inside were more recordings, smaller ones, labeled in marker that had faded to near illegibility. Observation A. Self-review. Integration attempt. I didn't know why I kept going. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the cassette as I slid it into the dusty player. The TV clicked on with a low whine. No sound at first. Just grainy footage of a small, dimly lit room. The same room I was standing in now. Time stamped in the bottom corner, 1999. I appeared on screen a few seconds later. A boy, maybe 8 or 9. Wearing pajamas, hair too long, eyes blank. I was sitting on the rug in the middle of the room, facing the camera. There was a voice off screen, calm and instructive. My father. Now, Travis, he said, tell us where Alex is. The boy stared forward, then turned slowly to face an empty chair across from him. He's here, the boy said. He's in the chair. The camera held on him for a long time. He didn't blink, didn't move. Describe Alex, my father prompted. He looks like me, the boy said. But he's braver. He takes the pain when I can't. There was something about the way he said it, like it wasn't a metaphor. Like it was law. Truth. Another tape. This one started in the middle of a session. The boy, me, was crying, but silent. Face wet, hands folded tightly in his lap. A woman's voice this time. I didn't recognize it, but it wasn't soft. You are not both. One must take the burden. One must be sacrificed. The boy rocked forward and whispered, make it Alex. The footage jumped. Static. Then clarity. I was older now, maybe 13. Sitting alone in the corner of the room, curled into myself. A figure entered the frame. My father. He sat down beside me and said, do you remember what you did? The boy looked up slowly. He's gone, he whispered. Yes, Gerard said. Because you made him go. That was the only way to survive. I felt the weight of that line like a physical blow. I hit pause and stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. He was never real. Alex was never real. The memories, the fights, the talks at night, those were mine. All of them. Fabricated to make the unbearable possible. A split, a fracture, a way to live with what they'd done to me. What they'd made me do. I was the one in the chair. I was the one standing over the chair. Every time I thought I saw him, his face, his silhouette in the hallway, his voice in the dark, it was me. It had always been me. And the worst part, the part that crushed the last piece of resistance inside me, was that I had believed in him more than I believed in myself. I dropped the remote, staggered back, tried to speak, but my throat refused. My body was ice. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The world felt tilted, unreal. I pressed my palms to the cold concrete floor and screamed, not out of fear, not out of pain, but out of something deeper. The sound of a man watching the last of his reality collapse. Somewhere in this house, hidden in walls or memories or files I hadn't uncovered yet, was the truth about what happened to May. But before I could find her, I had to face something else. I had to face myself. Not Alex. Me. I didn't know any of this was happening while I was still in the basement, knees pressed into the concrete, surrounded by the ghosts of my own broken mind. I didn't know Julia had already left the house hours earlier, following a hunch that, by some miracle, turned out to be right. She had remembered a name. There had been a file in my office, hastily scribbled and stuffed behind a stack of therapy notes. The name scrawled across the top, Jeremy Caldwell. A former patient of mine from years ago, someone I had seen for court-ordered therapy after an assault charge he later recanted. I remembered bits and pieces, his pale eyes, his stutter, the way he folded his hands like a prayer every time he spoke. What I hadn't remembered, apparently, was that I kept pushing him to confront his guilt, even after he swore he didn't do it. That I told him memory was fluid, that we could shape it. He ended up confessing. He served time. And when he got out, he vanished. Julia had found an address. Not recent. Just a scribble, half erased, on the back of a client questionnaire. An old farmhouse outside of Stamford, abandoned now. But something about it stuck in her mind. She didn't even call the police. She just got in the car and drove. She found May there. Alone. Wrapped in a dusty blanket in the corner of the upstairs bedroom. Surrounded by boxes of old furniture and papers. Staring out the window like she'd been waiting for someone to come get her. When Julia opened the door, May didn't scream or run. She just said, "I knew it'd be you." Julia pulled her into her arms, checking her all over. She was cold, but unhurt. Hungry, but safe. Scared, but calm in that weird way May sometimes got when she had already processed what had happened before anyone else could catch up. It wasn't until they were back in the car, heat blasting, that May spoke again. She said, "I saw Daddy in my dream." Julia asked, "You mean last night?" May shook her head. "No, I was still awake. It felt like a dream, but he wasn't the same." She looked out the window, then whispered, "He was talking to the other dad." Julia asked what she meant. May didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead. "He said I had to run." Before it started again. Julia didn't ask more after that. Just drove. White-knuckled, blinking back tears, one hand gripping the wheel, the other on May's knee. The farmhouse faded into the rearview mirror like a bad memory dissolving. When she got home, she called the police. They took May to the hospital to be checked. Then they started asking questions. Julia gave them what she had. She didn't mention the tapes. She didn't know about the basement yet. About the room with the chair. About Alex. About me. But May was safe. And somehow, even after all of this, she still believed I was worth saving. I don't remember the exact moment it all gave out. Not really. It wasn't one clean break, more like a series of small fractures finally giving way. The drive back from my parents' house is a blur. I must have made it through red lights and highway exits on instinct alone, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, the sky was beginning to lighten, the kind of color that doesn't belong to night or morning. I sat in the car with the engine still running, staring at the front door. The lights in the house were on. I told myself to breathe. Just breathe. But when I walked in, Julia was standing in the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, and I could hear her voice tremble as she said the words that would change everything. "He's back." Yes. No, he's not violent. But he's not himself. I didn't try to listen to the rest. I went upstairs. The air felt thick, heavy like syrup. I could smell the detergent on the laundry in the hallway, could see the faint outline of May's backpack resting against the wall, could feel the shape of my life curling in on itself. That's when I heard my mother. Not a memory. Her voice. Right behind me. She said my name the way she used to when I was sick as a child, soft and sweet and terrifying. "Travis," she whispered. "You did well." I turned. No one was there. I went into the bathroom and turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face, tried to steady myself. In the mirror, I saw my father. Just for a second. Standing behind me. He didn't speak, but his eyes didn't blink. I backed out of the room, heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to black out. I went into the hallway, and suddenly it was the basement again. The walls were red. The carpet was damp. The door was open. Alex was there. He sat on the bottom step, elbows on his knees, staring up at me like he'd been waiting all along. "You can't pretend anymore," he said. "You can't be both." I covered my ears, shut my eyes, whispered no, no, no over and over until my voice cracked, but I could still hear him. Then another voice. "Maze, I saw you." She was behind me now, standing in the hallway in her school hoodie, her hair messy, eyes hollow. "You talked to the wrong one," she said. "He told me to run." I collapsed in the doorway, hands over my head, begging it all to stop. But the voices didn't stop. They got louder. They layered on top of each other until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. I felt my heart pounding through the floorboards, felt my skin vibrating with heat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I remember flashing lights. I remember strong hands holding my wrists, straps pulling across my chest, voices saying words I couldn't understand. I remember screaming until I couldn't scream anymore, until my throat was raw and bleeding and the world folded itself into static. And then, quiet. White walls. A narrow bed. A voice asking me my name, gently, like I might not know it. I answered Alex. Then I said Travis. And then I said nothing at all. They didn't let me have mirrors the first few days. The room was bare, white walls, one small window with wire-lace glass, a bed bolted to the floor, and a chair no one sat in unless they had to. At night, I'd lie there with the ceiling humming above me, fluorescent and indifferent, and try to remember who I was supposed to be. The session started on the third day. They sent in a quiet woman with dark hair and the kind of calm that made me want to scream. Her name was Dr. Kaminsky. She didn't say much at first, just sat across from me, legs crossed, notebook in hand, waiting for me to speak. I didn't. Not for 3 sessions. On the 4th, she asked me if I knew why I was there. I said, because something broke. She nodded. Can you tell me what? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to lay it all out like a bad story. But every time I reached for the words, my throat locked. I kept seeing the chair, the tapes, my hands, the voice that told me I had to do it. After a week, they gave me paper and a pen. I started writing things down. Words, fragments, sounds. Things like basement, mirror, May. Alex isn't me. He took the pain. I let him. Most of the time, I just stared at the paper until my hand cramped. One afternoon, during a session, Dr. Kaminsky placed a small audio recorder on the table. "This is you," she said. "From when you were 14. A group home intake. You said your name was Levi. Not Travis. Not Alex." She pressed play. The voice was mine. Higher. Uncertain. I was talking about dreams. About guilt. About a room with red walls. I said someone was missing. I kept asking if they'd found him. I said I did something bad, but I couldn't remember what. Hearing it, I felt like I was watching my own autopsy. In the weeks that followed, we started piecing things together. The split wasn't clean. It never is. Somewhere between trauma and survival, my mind had chosen erasure. It carved Alex out of me like a twin shadow. A place to store the violence, the pain, the guilt. My parents, what they did, what they made me believe, was too much for a child to carry. So I didn't. Alex did. Every memory I couldn't face became his. Every bruise, every scream, every moment in that room with the soot-stained mirror and the echo of my father's voice. It all got filed under a name that wasn't mine. But it was mine. And the worst of it, the part that still claws at the inside of my ribs when I try to sleep, is what they made me do to him. I remember now. Not all of it. Not in perfect detail. But I remember enough. They called it purification. My father said it was the only way to become whole again. To burn away the weakness, the shame, the child that couldn't stop crying in the night. They sat me in the chair. They told me to hurt him. To shame him. To break him down and rebuild him. They said if I did it well enough, he'd disappear, and I'd be clean. They handed me the tools. They told me which words would wound deeper than fists. And I did it. Because I was terrified. Because I believed them. Because I wanted them to love me. And when it was over, they told me he was gone. That he had served his purpose. That I was strong now. And I nodded. I became Travis. That was the deal. It wasn't real. None of it. Not the house in New Haven. Not the carefully built life with the office and the business cards and the therapist's couch where I sat and pretended to help people. Not even Julia. Not in the way I thought I'd known her. She loved a man who didn't exist. A man who buried a graveyard inside himself and called it peace. Now, in this white room with its humming lights and silence that sticks to your skin, all that's left is the aftermath. I'm trying. Every day, I sit with Dr. Kaminsky and peel back another layer. Some days I can't breathe. Some days I scream into the pillow until I black out. Other days, I just sit, numb, remembering things I never asked to remember. But I'm here. Still here. And for now, that has to be enough. Julia didn't tell me exactly where they went. Only that it was far enough that May could start fresh. Somewhere with wide skies and quiet streets and no memories heavy enough to bend the walls. She sent word through the hospital administrator, nothing elaborate, just a message that they were safe, and that May was doing better. That she had started drawing again. That she smiled more often now, even if she still looked over her shoulder sometimes. Weeks passed. Seasons began to change. Leaves turned brittle and fell like old regrets across the edge of the hospital garden. Then one morning, Julia received a letter. Handwritten. Folded cleanly inside a plain envelope. No return address. It didn't need one. The note was short. "Thank you for saving my light." That was it. No apology. No promises. Just that one line, written in uneven script, like it had taken all the steadiness I had left. The last anyone saw of me that day, I was sitting alone in the hospital garden. Pale sunlight filtered through the trees, warming my shoulders as I read a book I wasn't really reading. There was an empty seat next to me on the bench. I didn't look at it. I just sat there, eyes half closed, face toward the sky, letting the quiet rest on me like something sacred. And maybe it was. Maybe peace, when it comes, doesn't announce itself. Maybe it just sits beside you in silence and waits for you to notice.